This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, this episode 240 marks the 4th anniversary of this podcast. That's right, way back the first week of June in 2020, as we were in COVID, the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast started. And amazingly, I've never missed a week in creating an episode and then publishing it. Sometimes there's been more than one episode too. I've done my best to try and look at mental toughness, that is, from a range of different angles. And if there's something that you, the listener, would like to hear about, please do get in touch and let me know. It's always good to tap into other people's wisdom. Now, as far as this episode goes, though, an area which I find is fascinating and is probably the biggest area that I go on to help athletes with is playing to their best of their ability under pressure when they're competing. So many guys and girls that I've supported over the years and do support now, well, they can train and they can practice, no problem at all. But then when it comes down to competing, when it comes down to clutch situations, it's a very different matter. So this is a topic that we're going to touch on in this episode, where my guest, Dre Baldwin, former professional basketball player, spoke to me about his experiences, and he goes on to share his thoughts and suggestions that can help you on this massively important topic. Enjoy.
So playing as well as you practice was one of my biggest challenges in sports, because when you're one of the biggest things that a lot of athletes don't think about, and I think a lot of parents don't think about when their child is coming up as an athlete, is not just the practice, because these days, there are so many trainers for every sport and there are programs and, here's the workout you can do. You can get it off the internet. But the biggest thing is once the athlete has developed the skills, or while you're developing the skills, you need game experience. So you know what it feels like to actually use those skills in a live situation that's not controlled, an uncontrolled situation, that's open situation. So for example, these days I like to do a boxing training, and my boxing trainer, we are doing the drills and hitting the mitts and this combination, that combination. But every once in a while, he'll just break off from the combination and he'll just start throwing punches. And it's like, and I don't always react the right way. And he's like, well, see, in a real match, that's how it's going to be. Like, it's not going to be coordinated. Like, all right, throw this punch, then that punch. And it's the same thing in every other sport, is that you can practice the skills all you want, but you need that experience of actually performing in the game. So in that book, How to Play as Well as You Practice, I help people with two things. One aspect is the mindset aspect of getting yourself mentally prepared for the fact that you're going into an uncontrolled situation and you're going to have to respond instinctively. You're not going to have time to think about what to do. And the second thing is understanding that this book is telling you things, but you need to go out there and actually get live game experience. You need to get your butt kicked every now and then so that you know what it feels like, you know that you can survive it, and then you can get better in those live situations. But as they say, real life alters the lab test. So no matter what you're doing in life, sports or anything else, you have to get experience actually doing the live thing. Practicing is good, but practicing is only half the game. You have to get out there and actually do it so that you can see how you respond to it and get used to responding in the moment instinctively to the randomness that you're going to get from other people.
I'll take you back to one of the points you mentioned about the thinking side and how, when you're training, you need to be an autopilot, if you like, when you're actually going into a match situation there. So how do you stop that overthinking when you're out there on the court or on the pitch or wherever it is?
Great question. So the first thing is you got to prepare as well as you could possibly prepare, so that you have all your skills in place. You have your tools in place. When you are thinking or when you are in practice, you actually are doing things the way they need to be done. This is the reason why we practice, right? So as they say, perfect practice makes perfect performance. So you do want to practice. I'm not devaluing the value of practice. I mean, after all, I am the guy who says work on your game. So do have all the practice in place so that you have the skills in place. The second thing is your question is how to not overthink. By the time you get to performance time, you shouldn't be thinking at all. So any amount of thinking is overthinking when you get into the performance. And the reason why I say that is because in a live performance, especially in something like sports where you have competition and you have other people trying to beat you, and in a sport like, let's say, basketball or soccer or boxing, you have someone trying to stop you, right? So unlike, let's say, running or golf where the opponent can't do anything to hinder you, but in those sports, the opponent can actually play defense and stop you. Any moment that you take to think about what you're going to do, the opportunity is gone. By the time the message travels from your brain to your body to actually do it, the opportunity is not there anymore. So you have to be trained to respond instinctively to whatever happens around you. That's the biggest thing about not overthinking. You shouldn't be thinking at all. You should be completely blank, just going off of instinct. And the third thing is, as I talked about a moment ago, you have to get the experience, because the first time that you try to do this is probably not going to work out. There are a few exceptions. People who just have just natural talent and ability and it just comes naturally and they can respond in a moment and they don't need a lot of training for doing it. But most of us, the normal amongst us, we have to get that live experience and get your ass kicked a couple times where things are not working the way that you thought they would based on the way that you practiced it. It didn't work out that way in the game. You need to get that experience under your belt so that, again, internally you understand that even when it doesn't go your way, you can survive. Like, you didn't die. You lost, but you didn't die. And then, all right, now that you saw what happened, can you come back and adjust so that you're ready to respond to that the next time that you see it? Especially in sports, every athlete has to go through that. But in any level of performance, everybody has to go through that in order to become great at what they do.
So one of the things that Dre touched on there was being entrenched in fear. The fear of being perfect. The fear that you won't perform perfectly, or that you won't perform to the standards that you set yourself. And when we have this fear, well, it often means that athletes go on to play it safe, that we're tense, that our rhythm and our timing are way out of sync. If you're like me, a golfer, your touch around the greens will be affected. Or when you've got a full shot, trying to play it at 80-90% will be really, really difficult and you'll likely get too fast. Again, the batter in cricket might feel the same, and they go on to overcommit to shots and maybe take too many risks, or perhaps go the other way too. And regardless of whether it's golf or cricket, this is universal across all sports, this fear of being perfect. What it often goes on to mean is we think too much, and we're not able to go onto autopilot and reactive mode, as Dre touched on. So when it comes down to my words of wisdom, I'd like you to make a note. That's right, get a pen and paper out, and I'd like you to make a note of 3 key points which link to playing with freedom, playing fearlessly, being childlike in your sport, or playing as if you're with your friends. And these 3 things, essentially, they are the key ingredients of what makes up a good performance, or a great performance. What would it actually look like? I'd encourage you, when you are writing these 3 things down though, is that you make sure that these elements are within your control. So what do I mean by that? By inside of your control? Well, I'm a golfer. I play off a 2 handicap, executing my pre-shot routine time and again, regardless of whether I'm doing really well or whether I've had a disaster on a hole. I just keep going through that same routine. I trust my process. Secondly, I see myself as a pretty sociable golfer. I like to have a chat with my playing partners, regardless of whether it's the 1st, the 3rd, the 16th or the 17th. So I'm going to continue chatting to my partners, my playing partners, regardless of how well I'm doing. And then the last one, well, it's when there's some important decisions to be made, I'm going to trust my judgment. I'm going to commit to smooth swings, or smooth strokes if I'm putting. There, well, there's a focus on rhythm and timing essentially, and obviously playing with trust again. So over to you. What are your 3 things? Feel free to drop me a message by social media, or you can even email me, info@sport-excellence.co.uk. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And whilst you're on, also get yourself signed up to the Mental Edge newsletter. It's a regular newsletter which goes out every 2 to 3 weeks. It's packed with tips and tricks and advice to be able to help you. Have a fantastic day. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.